Richard was a man of integrity and fairness. He valued loyalty above all else. Loyalty to people, loyalty to his favourite business, and loyalty to his own principles. After opening a security agency and earning his first money, Richard realised that there were really very few loyal people. His once loyal partners betrayed him for the promise of more money elsewhere, and former enemies put on false smiles when they saw his newfound wealth. Even his beloved wife betrayed him. One ordinary day, Richard unexpectedly returned from a business trip and caught her in bed with another man. It was an act he had never imagined seeing from his modest wife. Heather, his wife, was an orphan, and if he had thrown her out, she would have had nowhere to go. Being a compassionate man, Richard found the strength to forgive his beloved wife, or at least he forgave her in words, because since that day, their lives changed dramatically. Richard could no longer look into Heather's eyes, and he could no longer trust anyone. From that day forward, he devoted his life to a new friend, a dog named Caden. Caden, a cocker spaniel, was not just a pet to Richard. He became his loyal friend he had always hoped to find. Caden became his comrade and his companion, embodying all the qualities of loyalty that Richard desperately sought in friends, business partners, relatives, and even his wife. From the moment Richard brought Caden home from the kennel, he knew it was fate. After Heather's betrayal, Richard couldn't bear to look at her or divorce her, as she begged him not to throw her out. Instead, they decided to live in separate parts of their large country house. Richard's affection and love were now reserved for his faithful spaniel. Caden was not only Richard's best friend, but also his hunting ally. Richard had become passionate about hunting since childhood, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather. So, over the next 15 years, Richard and Caden enjoyed love and mutual understanding. Richard had already left his business and retired, and he and Caden eagerly awaited each hunting season. Caden, an obedient and faithful dog, knew numerous commands and excelled at picking up woodcock and partridges. He effortlessly found game and brought it to his beloved master. These last 15 years were the best in Richard's life, because he spent them with Caden. A single tear rolled down the man's cheek. "You are my best friend," Richard whispered, struggling to hold back his tears. He turned away from the small bundle containing the lifeless body of Caden, unable to bear the sight any longer. "How will I go on without you?" he whispered. Heather wrinkled her nose disdainfully. "It's just a dog, Richard," she sneered. "You're burying him as if he were a human being. Wake up! It's just a dog," she continued, indignant. "You should love your wife like that." Richard didn't even bother to look at his spouse. "Get out," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere," she protested. "I want to know what all of this is about. It's like a circus, for God's sake." "Get out," the man said, raising his voice slightly. "You're not worth half of what Caden was. Please, just leave the funeral." Heather rolled her eyes dramatically. "Fine," she exclaimed, and briskly walked towards the exit of the small cemetery, where they were going to bury Caden. "Idiot," she thought to herself. "He's gone mad, and everyone is dancing to his tune. Someone should tell him this isn't normal." Heather was a respectable and elegant woman. She met Richard when she was 23 and he was 35. It was probably impossible to say that Heather had ever truly loved her husband. Most likely she didn't know how to love at all. Having moved to the big city and relying on her beautiful appearance, Heather sought a wealthy man who could provide for her. She grew up in an orphanage. Perhaps this is why she didn't know how to love and saw people as mere tools to achieve her goals. From the ages of 18 to 23, she went through many men, but none of them were what she wanted. It was only when she met Richard that she realised he was the one she needed. He had owned a security agency for several years and was a fairly well-off man. Heather had a special gift. She could easily read other people's personalities and mimic their behaviour to entice them. On their first date, she would innocently say, "Oh, what a coincidence! I love hunting. My dream is to marry a hunter. The thick wild forests, the smell of gunpowder, fresh, hand-caught meat. How I love it all." Not surprisingly, Richard fell in love with the young and beautiful Heather, believing she was his destiny. The couple married 6 months after meeting. Heather got what she wanted. She became the wife of a rich and successful man. However, she despised his hobbies and interests. She hated nature and preferred city life. She disliked long hikes, overnight stays in tents. She hated dogs, birds, and animals in general. She hated everything her husband loved. Deep in her heart, she hoped that Richard would die sooner or later, perhaps accidentally shot during a hunt, so she could get the business and his real estate. The day Heather was caught cheating, she pleaded with her husband not to leave her. Richard Anatolievich forgave his wife, but they no longer shared a bed. For the next 15 years, they barely communicated, merely coexisting within the walls of their large house. Heather despised Caden, because now Caden occupied her husband's bedroom. Caden received the best treatment and was invested much money, while Heather lived in the house as a guest, not as a true wife. Although Richard did not kick her out, he lost all interest and, most importantly, respect for her. She often wondered if the affair had been worth the life her life had become. In fact, she had been cheating on Richard since the first year of their marriage. Who knew that day that her husband would return on time from a business trip? The sense of shame had never visited this woman's soul. It was inaccessible to her from the beginning. Heather lived by her instincts, driven by pleasure, satisfaction of her needs, and a sense of her own importance. Compassion, love, and loyalty were mere empty sounds to her. Now Heather could only wait in silence for Richard to pass away to inherit his legacy, but it seemed that the man was gaining new strength every day. "Fool! Idiot!" half-voiced the predatory woman behind the wheel of her SUV. She was heading towards the house and couldn't understand why her husband would fuss over a simple dog like that. She didn't understand why he bought expensive toys for the dog, or why they built a whole enclosure for it. Such an attitude towards a dog was foreign to her, and she despised it. After Caden's death, when she saw that Richard was planning a real funeral for the dog, she couldn't comprehend it. What nonsense, she thought, pushing hard on the gas pedal, speeding along a deserted highway that ran through a dense forest. How I hate it all! Meanwhile, Caden's funeral was coming to an end, and the small coffin was being lowered into the ground. Richard, though not showing it, was more depressed than he had ever been in his life. His soul was torn, and his heart ached with longing. Even on the day he learned of his wife's infidelity, he had not been so hurt. The pain of losing his best friend Caden was overwhelming. When the coffin was lowered and the workers had already begun to bury the grave, a strong male hand rested on Richard's shoulder. "I'm very sorry," said the man. It was his friend Christopher, with whom Richard often went out into the field, and a good acquaintance. Christopher, like his comrade, adored dogs and had his own dog kennel. He specialised in breeding one of the most beautiful hunting breeds, red Irish setters. What started as a simple hobby and love for dogs became his life's work. His kennel was renowned as one of the best in the country. His dogs were role models and consistently won prizes at exhibitions and field trials. There were so many people eager to buy a faithful friend from him that he personally selected the buyers, conducting tests and various checks. Christopher was one of the few people Richard wanted to see at Caden's funeral. "Thank you," Richard replied mournfully. "Thank you for coming. You know... Oh, never mind." He waved away, about to leave the small cemetery, when suddenly Christopher squeezed his shoulder tighter. "Richard, you need to talk it out. the man said with pressure. You, the main thing, don't worry about your wife. You know how women are. I haven't been worried about her for a long time, Richard answered quietly, stopping to continue the conversation. It's just that I feel something. What? Longing? Hopelessness? Not only that, Christopher. The man smiled, wrenching. When Caden was gone, I felt that my life was also leaving with him. I know I'm fading away. I can't explain it. Even before I knew that Caden was no longer alive, I felt something so strange, as if my heart had lost something important, as if something had broken away from it, leaving this world. I think I'm dying, Christopher. I'll die after Caden. Richard. The eyes of his friends rounded. Richard, what are you talking? It's the pain of loss. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. You're not dying. You're going to be okay. I don't need pity, Richard replied suddenly. I shared with you what I feel. Without Caden, I don't see the point of living anymore. Without him? Oh, how can I live without him? Tears froze in his eyes, and the man quickly turned away from his friend. It seemed to him that if anyone saw his weakness, it would hit his reputation, putting him in the dirt. My dog has been a loyal companion to me. There's no one else like him. I'm sorry to say that here, but you need a new dog, Christopher said, nodding his head confidently. Yes, that's right, a faithful, devoted dog. By the way, in my kennel, very soon there will be new puppies. Many of them are already booked, but for you, I think I'll single one out. Richard shook his head. This puppy won't be my Caden. No one will ever be able to replace him for me. Think about it. I know what I'm talking about. We're dog people. We can't do without our four-legged friends. Christopher smiled, and shaking his friend's hand firmly, left the pet cemetery. A puppy. The man said the word to himself, and thought for a moment. A faint smile spread across his face. His hand clenched into a fist. Sleep well, my boy, Richard said, looking at the fresh grave of his dog. Richard, are you kidding at me? Shouted Heather 2 months later. A dog again? Why? Richard seemed not to hear his wife, because all his attention was directed to the puppy. A month and a half after Caden's death, Richard, after thinking hard, decided to get another dog. Every day after the funeral, he felt worse and worse. The once active man seemed to be getting older and older every day. He was losing all interest in life, and it seemed to him that he was already ready to die. Trying to find the will to live, he made an important decision. He was going to get a puppy. Having called Christopher and agreed to a viewing, Richard arrived at the kennel. He saw his dog at once, an uneasy and clumsy puppy that had just opened his eyes and didn't know how to do anything. According to the kennel rules, one could buy a dog only when the puppy was at least 3 months old. However, Christopher knew his friend well, and he could be trusted. After another 2 weeks, Richard was on his way home from, and a new family member was sitting behind him in a carrier. The puppy had already had all the necessary vaccinations, was branded, and even had a passport ready. The little red-haired Irish setter, named Rio, was to become Richard's new best friend. Richard, damn you, I'm talking to you. The woman continued to be indignant. What the hell is this? Why do you need another dog? The grown and solid man sat upright on the floor, like a small child playing with the puppy. Little Rio wagged his dainty tail merrily and twirled in one place. Rio, Rio, do you know what your name is? Rio de Janeiro. Richard laughed, continuing to rub his furry friend behind the ear. Richard! What do you want from me, woman? Finally, he turned his attention to his wife. If you don't like something, no one is keeping you here, he said emotionlessly. Heather immediately changed anger to mercy. "Well, darling," she said affectionately, holding out her husband's hand. "How can I be without you? Why are you sulking?" Richard jerked away from his wife and nimbly got to his feet, taking the puppy under his arm. "Without me?" he interrogated. "I think you'll be fine. You'll get through this, no problem." He was about to leave the living room, but Heather blocked his way, not allowing him to pass. "What are you talking about?" she asked in a thin, high-pitched voice. "You're the love of my life. I gave you all of myself." She looked up into his eyes expectantly, as she usually did. Of course, the cunning woman was lying. As already mentioned, the feeling of love, warmth, care for someone other than herself was unavailable to her. "Richard, I've given to you my whole life." "Stop it!" The man waved it away irritably. "I'm not a boy anymore to hang on to your flirtations." He turned and sat down on the couch, settling the little dog down next to him. "I don't know why you didn't leave then, but remember, I wouldn't mind if you left right now." "How dare you!" She sighed theatrically, clutching her chest. "Ah, my heart! How can you not be ashamed of driving me crazy? I love you. That man, that cheating, it was a mistake, stupid and insignificant. I've never loved anyone the way I love you." "Lies. You love no one. Probably I was wrong then with you. I pitied the poor orphan, and yes, I had feelings for you back then. Heather, go and mind your own business and leave us alone." "I loved you back then, and I love you now." Heather tried to hug her husband, sitting down next to him. "Why do you need that dog? Huh? You have me, and God forbid something happens to you. And what will happen to this doggy then? Have you thought about that? I'm not going to take care of him or go hunting with him. Richard, let's take him back before it's too late. Tell me, what are you missing?" "Doggy? Do you even know how much that dog is worth? His pedigree, his kennel, his breed, after all, it's all costly. And what does that mean if something happens to me? Heather, I'm only 102 years older than you. I don't care how much it costs. I don't care if there's a mutt sleeping in your bed." "Don't you dare," spoke the man, boiling quietly. I'm sorry, Heather smiled enchantingly. "Well, why do you need him? Let's take him back." "Heather, piss off!" rudely replied the man, unable to withstand the pressure of his wife. "Not your business. I've already told you, if you don't like it, you're free to leave us. I'll do what I want." He was silent for a while, daring to say the following. "You didn't give me any children, but I need someone to love." Heather, shocked by her husband's words, suddenly jumped up from her seat. "Ah, so, and this is after all that I've been through." She gave her husband a stern look for a couple of seconds, then ran out of the living room. "Oh, shit!" the man scolded. "Heather! Heather!" He quickly asked Rio to wait and followed her at a leisurely pace. In the 5th year of their marriage, Richard had been insisting on having children. He couldn't understand why his beloved wife always refused. At first, she said they needed more time in their marriage to get to know each other better. Then she said they needed more money to have a child. Then she said that times were tough, and a fortune teller told her she couldn't have a baby until she was 35. Richard did his best to convince her otherwise. Finally, she realised that Richard wouldn't give up and might leave her if she didn't give birth. Therefore, Heather agreed, at least in words. She solemnly announced to her husband that she was ready for children, and the couple began trying to conceive. The first time, Heather deceived her husband by secretly taking birth control pills. However, her deception was quickly uncovered when he accidentally saw the pills in her nightstand. After getting away with it, she realised she needed to take more drastic action. She finally allowed herself to get pregnant and, by taking a special drug, arranged a miscarriage. Of course, Heather didn't want children. Not only did she not want them, she hated them. She knew she could never love a child, just as she could never love anyone in her entire life. Heather sacrificed her own health and the new life growing inside her to achieve her goals. After that cheating miscarriage, Heather put on a real show, wringing her hands, sobbing loudly, howling and tearing at her hair. "Never again!" she shouted in her heart. "I'll never dare to do it again!" In general, she did everything to make the impressionable Richard pity her and bury any thoughts of becoming a father. She manipulated her husband as if he were her puppet. "Heather, I'm sorry." Panting, Richard spoke as he caught up with his spouse in her bedroom. "I'm sorry I reminded you of the miscarriage. I didn't want." "Of course you didn't," she said theatrically, putting her hand to her forehead. "You weren't the one who lost the baby. How dare you remind me of that agony, of that pain?" "Heather." The man moved closer to his wife and, hesitating, pulled her into his arms. He couldn't remember the last time he had hugged her. "Well, I'm sorry to remind you, but that was my child too. I went through the same thing that you did." "Of course you did," she resented, snuggling into her husband's shoulder and smiling triumphantly where he couldn't see her face. "But it wasn't you who carried him, was it?" "Well, I'm sorry," said the man once more, and Heather began to sob loudly, imitating crying. Richard held his wife a little tighter. Heather, on the other hand, smiled predatorily, knowing he couldn't see her face. "Idiot," she thought to herself, delighted at how successfully she had once again deceived her husband. She continued to sob loudly and desperately until the following happened. Richard suddenly clutched his heart. "Ah!" he cried out. "My heart! Heather, an ambulance!" The woman took a couple of wide steps backward. "What's wrong with you?" she said, anticipating the events that would follow with vengeful joy. "My heart!" wheezed the man, already on his knees and collapsing on his side. "Call a doctor," he said in a quiet, frightening whisper. "Heart!" Heather, frightened by this terrifying and painful scene, rushed to the phone, but suddenly stopped abruptly. She looked around and remembered which servants were at home today. The housekeeper had the day off today, she said quietly, thinking aloud. The cleaning woman won't be in until tomorrow. She suddenly smiled broadly. We're all alone in the house. "Heather!" Richard was already losing consciousness, but still clinging to life with a last effort of will. "Call an ambulance," he hoarsely squeezed out. "No," she replied, smiling wryly. "Who can prove that I saw you die? And I can't wait any longer, as I'm sick of you. I only want your inheritance." She laughed wickedly. "And you didn't write a will for someone else, did you?" "And who would?" she added with a grin. "You've got no one else, except that mangy dog. I'll have everything, at last." Richard, realizing that he was dying, gathered his last strength and quietly replied, "Deceiver, so that's how you turned out to be. Your inheritance is ready. Rio!" Then Richard took his last breath, and the name of the red-haired puppy froze on his lips. Heather was rushing down the deserted forest road. Cheerful music was heard from the speakers, and a bloodthirsty smile froze on her face. She was wearing wide sunglasses and a black silk scarf tied around her head. "Finally! I've waited so many years for this moment. So many years," thought the crazy lady. She drove down the highway, rehearsing her tearful speech. Her husband had finally died. He died in her arms, and, in fact, she was the one who had done this to him. She was the one who didn't call for an ambulance. She was the one who gave him a heart attack with the tears about their unborn child. And now, when everything was settled, with Richard's funeral. It was possible to do what Heather had dreamed of all the years of their marriage. It was time to deal with the inheritance. She drove to the notary, rehearsing how she would sob ungodly, preying on the pity of others. She was already approaching the appointed place when she suddenly remembered that she wasn't quite alone in the car. "Exactly!" she exclaimed, braking sharply. There was a sharp squeal of brakes, and Heather swerved off the highway, stopping on the side of the road at the fork of a secondary road. "You!" she hissed, pointing a finger with a long purple nail at the small, puzzled puppy sitting on the back seat. The little dog tilted his head to the side, of course not realizing what was going on. After his master had disappeared to some unknown place, he decided that now it was a woman who was his main mistress. He happily bobbed his thin tail, expecting nothing bad. "You're a disgusting, stinking dog. I won't let you ruin my happy new life," she scolded at the unfortunate fluffball. With those words, she leisurely got out of the car, opened the back door, and held out a long, manicured hand to the puppy. Little Rio, without any backward thought, licked her hand. He was excited, figuring they were going for a walk now. Oh, if that puppy only knew what awaited him now. Cruel Heather, without a drop of regret, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and with a swing threw it into the grass. Then she squeamishly shook off her hands, got back in the car, and before the dog had time to realize anything, pressed the gas pedal with all her might. The 3-month-old puppy was all alone. At first, he thought it was a fun game and quickly shook himself off and rushed after the car. But it was in vain. Having exhausted himself and yapped pitifully, he quietly wandered along the highway, abandoned, nobody needed. At the same time, Heather turned on loud music in the cabin and rejoiced. At last, she managed to get rid of all those who were so much in her way. Oh, what happiness! She was already approaching her destination, not knowing that her grand plan was unlikely to come true. Many things were not as simple as they seemed at first glance. "Mum," said the boy, and raised his blonde eyebrows in surprise. "Mum, look!" "What is it, sweetie?" the boy's mum asked, not taking her eyes off the road. "You know, you can see deer here. This place is really wild. Look carefully, Liam." "No, look, I think there's a dog." The boy kept pointing his finger at the fogged window. "Mum, he's all alone, please stop." The woman behind the wheel slowed down, pulling over to the curb. Squinting her eyes, she followed her son's instructions with her gaze. "Oh, indeed, and he is so tiny," she said in amazement. "We must help him," said the boy decisively. The boy's mother cautiously drove closer to where the trembling red puppy was sitting. "My goodness, he's so tiny and so cute. I guess he must have a collar." With those words, the woman got out of the car. Her 10-year-old son Liam jumped out after his mother. He sprinted toward the puppy, and when he saw that the little dog was frightened and crouched on the ground, he stopped. "He's afraid," said the boy in a whisper. "Of course he's afraid. Don't frighten him," the woman said, and began to walk slowly toward the puppy, holding out her hand to him. "Don't be afraid, baby. We want to help you," she said affectionately. Little Rio looked at these strangers with puzzlement and distrust. At first he wanted to run away, but then, realizing something for himself, he took a careful, slow step towards them. His thin tail, clamped between his trembling hind legs, started wagging weakly. On this very roadside, he had already spent several hours. At first, not understanding what was going on, he tried to catch up with every passing car. Maybe his mistress was there, but all in vain. It seemed that he was left all alone in this world, abandoned first by his master and then by his mistress. Frozen and hungry, he was too young to take care of himself. Rio took a step, Then another and another. And now he was sniffing carefully at the hand that was extended to him. It smelled very nice, much better than his mistress, who smelled with a horrible, strong, synthetic scent. "Well done," praised the woman, smiling. "Now, let me see that collar of yours." She gently lifted the little one into her arms, holding him under her breast. Rio rumbled softly, realizing he was in no danger and accepting being touched. The young woman twirled the collar in her hands. It was just an ordinary puppy collar, but made of rather expensive leather. Attached in the middle was a small hard capsule. That was it. No phone number, no address to take the puppy to. Carefully she removed the collar, hoping to find some information on the other side. But alas, there was still nothing, except for a small engraving. The woman raised her eyebrows. "Rio de Janeiro," she read aloud. It was the only thing written on the collar. "What does that mean?" she asked her son. "Is he Brazilian?" The boy couldn't bear to just stand there any more, so he took a wide step toward the puppy. He started to rub him behind his long ears and gently stroke his smooth head. "Mum, I think that's his name. Rio de Janeiro. Rio is in short. Look, he's responding." "I suppose you're right," said Liam's mum thoughtfully. "What should we do? He seems completely lost." "His owners are probably already searching for him," the boy said with longing in his voice. "How did he end up so lost?" The woman lifted her head and glanced around. After a few seconds of silence, she responded to her son, saying, "Liam, I don't think he's lost. I believe he was abandoned." "Abandoned?" the little boy exclaimed indignantly. "How could someone do that, Mummy? Can't we take him with us?" "To keep him?" the woman asked in surprise. "But honey, we don't have a place for a dog, especially since we don't even know what breed he is. What if he grows up to be a huge dog, and we don't have much money either?" The boy tilted his head dreamily to the side. "Yes," he stretched, seemingly oblivious to his mother's concerns. "He'll grow up to be a big dog who can protect us. Mummy, we can't leave him here. He'll be all alone." "Oh, you're right, darling," the woman replied softly. "Of course, we'll take him with us." Diana was a young single mother. Jack, her son's father, left her when she was 7 months pregnant. Diana was a kind, intelligent, beautiful, and incredibly capable woman. She graduated from school with honours, making her family proud, and entered one of the country's vet schools. Diana was admired by her teachers and friends for her beauty and sharp mind. She had a wonderful childhood, a hopeful teenage year, and blossomed into a beautiful and intelligent woman. Many people in her circle believed that she was capable of achieving great things. Her first year at the vet school went smoothly. Diana excelled in her studies, had great relationships with her classmates, and even had time for fun and a personal life. Life was vibrant. Then Jack entered her life and disrupted it. They met when Jack had come to pick up his documents after being expelled. A word after a word, smiles, a slight flirtation, and soon Diana was twisting her long, light blonde hair on a curling iron, preparing for another date. Upon learning who Diana was dating, her friends expressed concern. "He's a jerk," they lamented. "He's not right for you at all." But Diana didn't care about public opinion. There was something about Jack that intrigued her, something she herself lacked. Freedom from societal norms, boldness, and a complete rejection of the structure of the world. That's what attracted her. Unfortunately, good girls are often drawn to bad boys. Jack had been expelled from the vet school in his second year, due to poor academic performance, but it didn't seem to bother him at all. "That doesn't mean anything," he persuaded Diana on their first date. "I can achieve a lot, even without education." Their relationship progressed rapidly. Soon enough, Diana went with her beloved to his hometown during the New Year's vacation to introduce him to her family. To say that Diana's parents were shocked would be an understatement. Jack was not the type of person they had envisaged for their daughter. His long hair was haphazardly tied in a bun, his arms covered in peculiar tattoos, and he had piercings between his eyebrows. When Diana's mother saw her daughter's boyfriend, she clutched her heart, and her father, without hesitation, immediately kicked him out after he made disparaging remarks about their humble home. Diana sobbed uncontrollably in anguish. "Why? What has he done to you?" she angrily asked her parents. "He is not the kind of person he seems at first sight." But her parents stood their ground and strictly forbade her from dating Jack, which only fueled Diana's rebellious nature. "If you don't accept Jack, then you're no longer my parents," she declared resolutely. In response, her father, convinced that Diana would soon realise the mistake she had made, replied, "Well, then, if that's how you feel, you're no longer our daughter." So, overnight, Diana lost her parents. She cut off all contact with them and chose her boyfriend over her family. She returned to the dormitory with a mix of emotions. Resentment overwhelmed her, but it was too late to turn back. She stopped socialising with friends who disapproved of her relationship with Jack. Diana felt like the entire world was against their love. She didn't know how to proceed, but one thing was certain: no one could ever separate them. 6 more months passed, and Diana, after quarrelling with everyone, decided to move out of the dormitory and start a life together with Jack. She moved into his apartment, only to find that it was quite different from what he had described. The spacious downtown apartment turned out to be a modest 2-bedroom place on the outskirts. Instead of a housekeeper, Jack's 90-year-old grandmother, who suffered from dementia, lived with him. Diana was in complete shock when she saw the living conditions that awaited her, but it was too late to turn back because she had left her entire environment behind for Jack. Diana hoped for the best as she moved in with her boyfriend. He promised to achieve incredible success. "We'll make it through," she thought, "and the whole world will see what our love can accomplish." Once settled in her boyfriend's apartment, Diana began cleaning it up. She threw the dusty old carpets away, washed the curtains, and threw away all the junk that Jack's grandmother had collected over the years. Diana found solace in domestic chores, and the life of the promising young girl started to fade. She had abandoned her studies completely, and her mood constantly hovered around 0. Everything seemed boring to her. Jack no longer seemed like a rebel, but rather an immature and lazy man. Everything Diana had imagined about Jack turned out to be false. He had been expelled from the vet school, not because of a promising side job, but simply because he was lazy. Now she realised that even the money he spent on taking her out to cafes and movies was not his own, but his grandmother's pension. Jack started to be absent from home more frequently, leaving Diana to spend her evenings with his granny, cleaning up the mess that the elderly woman created due to her dementia. Diana did her best to take care of her. She felt pity for her and tried to help. On a day when Diana had lost her patience and was about to leave, she stumbled upon an old photograph. It had fallen out of the closet when she was packing her things. Diana looked at the photo and was stunned. It was a picture of Jack's grandmother in her 30s. She was beautiful, laughing and holding a strange apparatus while wearing a white robe. The inscription on the back of the photo revealed that she had once been a renowned researcher and a doctor of science. As Diana dug through the box where the photo had fallen from, she discovered more about Granny's past and made up her mind not to leave and have a serious conversation with Jack. She said his grandmother didn't deserve her own grandson to deprive her of her pension. She was also insistent that Jack find a job and use the pension to pay for a suitable nursing home that provided cleanliness and comfort for the elderly. At first, Jack lazily brushed off her concerns, but Diana persisted, and this made him furious. "Ah, you think you are the clever one," he shouted, glaring angrily at her. "How am I supposed to live then? Her pension is my main income. Do you know how she behaved when I was a kid? No. Then mind your own business. No nursing home for her. She can stay at home. She's not going to be living much longer anyway." Diana was completely shocked by what she heard. Since Jack's parents died when he was a teenager, his grandmother had no other relatives. So Diana had stayed in the apartment for the sake of the elderly woman. Now she finally abandoned her studies, taking care of an infirm old woman. And about a month later, she found out she was unexpectedly pregnant. When she saw 2 stripes on the test, she froze in place and felt nothing at all. On one hand, she always thought that children bring happiness, but on the other hand, Diana was unsure if Jack would make a good father. She felt unhappy and lost, not knowing what to do. The confused girl decided to call her parents first. When her father learned that she was expecting a child from Jack, he became furious. "Don't you dare give birth to a child from this freak!" he shouted into the phone. "You will give birth to the same imbecile as he is, and then we will definitely forget about you forever." That day, Diana realized that there was nowhere to turn for help. When Jack arrived home, she told him the latest news. "That's cool," he exclaimed. "You're surely entitled to some benefits and payments from government." Diana realized that her boyfriend was unlikely to change at all, but her heart still held on to the hope that he would. "He will change when the baby is born," she thought with a gasp. "The baby will make him a better man." Meanwhile, Jack found out that a single mother's allowance would be more than that of a married mother, so he decided to wait with the wedding. Until the judgmental and curious stares of her former classmates, Diana hurried to the dean's office. She had to do something that no one expected her to do, to withdraw her documents from the vet school without graduating. Looking mature and gaunt, she dispelled the myth that good girls never get into trouble. At first, her former classmates didn't even recognize this faded stranger as their Diana, mistaking her for someone's mother. People around her whispered, while the most insolent ones laughed and pointed their fingers, occasionally mentioning Jack's name. Ignoring the gossip, she held her head high, took her documents, and left the vet school forever. A new life awaited her, a life as an adult woman and a mother. Soon, the former student had to find work. Her unfinished education didn't provide any advantages, and without experience, poor Diana had to take any job that paid even a small amount of money, such as working as a dishwasher in a cafe. She used the money she earned to buy everything necessary for the future child, and saved the rest for her and Jack's grandmother's needs. As for Jack, he didn't help at all. He rarely showed up at home, and at some point Diana was horrified to find that the money she had saved was disappearing little by little. Soon, Diana learned the terrible truth. Jack suffered from a gambling addiction, and almost all the money Diana earned went towards his gambling. The heart of the soon-to-be mother shattered into pieces. She didn't know how to go on living. Her parents had abandoned her, she had no friends left, and the man for whom she had given up her future had betrayed her. Or rather, he turned out to be entirely different from the person she had imagined him to be. It was bitter and heartbreaking. Diana wanted to leave him, but her caring heart couldn't bear the thought of leaving his granny behind. But in the 7th month of pregnancy, fate intervened. On a cold winter evening, Jack came home, accompanied by a pretty young girl, who shyly hid her eyes. The man proudly announced that he had fallen in love, and rudely asked Diana to move out on the same day. So Diana had to leave the place she used to consider her home, abandoned by everyone. Feeling lonely and isolated, she didn't know where to go. If it hadn't been for the baby she was carrying, Diana might have given up. But for the sake of her baby, she persevered and began to fight. After a few weeks of staying with her former friends, who weren't too thrilled about her presence, luck finally smiled upon her. Diana came across a couple who were looking for a live-in housekeeper through classified ads. These kind people took her in, providing her with a job and shelter. Diana worked tirelessly, never considering rest. The life she had built for herself now, after 10 years of continuous labour, was achieved through pain and tears. She gave birth to a healthy boy named Liam and raised him alone all these years. She managed to climb out of the pit she had fallen into as a young, desperately in love student. Diana's current situation was not ideal. Debts were piling up, but nevertheless she could afford to rent a decent apartment, have a car, and to support herself and Liam. Although her life was far from perfect, Diana was grateful for what she had. She never reconciled with her parents, as the hurt was too deep. As for Jack, he didn't even answer her call from the maternity hospital. Diana lost the future that everyone had long and persistently predicted for her. She chose her child, her own flesh and blood. She did not have a higher education or a prestigious job, but she had something more valuable than money: a healthy and well-behaved son. She now worked at a veterinary clinic, just as she had once dreamed. While she didn't become a vet, the position of an administrator was within her reach. And now, in her and Liam's life, there was also a puppy, a small homeless creature in need of support and protection. The doors to the apartment opened, and a joyful Liam ran inside, waving his arms happily. "Mummy," he shouted with joy, "where will Rio sleep? Can he sleep with me? Please?" "Oh, Liam, don't get ahead of yourself," the child's mother said, trying to contain his excitement. "He still needs to get used to us. We'll find him a place now." With these words, Diana gently placed the puppy she had been holding on the floor. Little Rio froze fearfully, sniffing the air and looking around uncertainly, wagging his tail. "Mum, how old do you think he is?" Diana frowned. "I don't know, honey. This is the first time I've seen this breed of dog. I think he's still very young, maybe 2 or 2.5 months old. We have a lot of work ahead of us." And so, little Rio came to live with Diana and Liam, becoming a full member of the family. He seemed to grow rapidly, getting bigger and smarter every day. Diana was right when she said they had a lot to do. Rio turned out to be quite mischievous, running around the apartment like a bullet, knocking things over in his path. During walks, he would chase after pigeons in the neighbourhood, his funny face turning serious and attentive when he saw them. But despite the increased complexity, the family's life became brighter and more fulfilling. One day, Diana realised that the collar they found Rio with was too small for him. As she searched for a new collar on the internet, she absent-mindedly twirled the small collar in her hands, and something caught her eye. It was the capsule she had noticed when she first met Rio. "Liam?" she called to her son from the other room. "Liam, come here." The boy immediately came up to his mother, holding the tired puppy in his arms after their walk. The puppy's eyes closed, and its paws hung limply, showing its tiredness. Diana took the capsule off the collar and handed it to her son. "Look at this thing. Don't you think it's strange?" Liam placed the puppy on a nearby sofa and examined the capsule with curiosity. He twirled it around until he accidentally opened it into 2 pieces. Worried, he looked at his mother. "Mum, I didn't mean to break it." "It's okay, sweetie," his mother reassured him. She bent down to put the capsule back together, but noticed a small, rolled-up piece of paper on the floor. "What's this?" she wondered aloud. "Mum, wait." The boy grabbed his mother's hand before she could open the paper and looked longingly at Rio. "Mummy, what if this piece of paper has the address of Rio's former owners? Are we supposed to give him back?" Diana shook her head decisively. "No, Liam, this dog is ours and no one else's," she asserted confidently. If the former owners cared about the puppy, they wouldn't have abandoned him in the forest. "Yeah," Liam agreed cheerfully. "You're right, Mummy. What's up with that paper?" he asked impatiently. 591490. she read aloud. Is that it? She looked at Liam, perplexed. What kind of number is that? It doesn't look like a phone number. What do you think, Liam? The boy rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Maybe it's his personal number or something, like the branding on his tummy. You think so? Diana pondered. You're probably right. Suddenly, Rio yawned loudly and whined. Liam and his mum turned towards the sound to find Rio already awake, happy and still yawning sweetly. Within seconds, the boy and the puppy were running through the apartment, chasing each other and knocking things over. Diana laughed heartily as she watched them and couldn't even pretend to scold them. She placed an order from the pet store, got up from the computer desk and stretched. To hell with this number, she thought to herself. However, for some reason, she didn't dare to throw away the opened capsule along with the strange paper. Instead, Diana put the paper back in the capsule and headed for the large closet. She reached for the top shelf of the closet, found the box where her jewellery was kept, and put the capsule and the note inside. She placed the box back, and after a couple of minutes, she forgot about the strange find. At the same time, on the other side of town, an unusual and slightly frightening dialogue was taking place in the notary's office. "What the hell number do you want?" shouted Heather. "Can you explain what it is?" "I'm sorry, but I don't know myself," replied the young assistant notary in a calm and placating tone. "I'm only providing you with what is written in the document. If you don't have that number, then the inheritance was not meant for you." Heather's face turned purple, her hands shook and her eyebrows furrowed. "How dare you?" she began in a quiet tone. "Who are you to talk about my deceased husband? I am his lawful wife." "Mrs. Mulroney," the young man sighed. "To receive the inheritance of Mr. Mulroney, the heir must provide a certain numerical code. Recall that number, or look for it in your husband's belongings, or—" "Or what?" the widow said angrily, and then her face noticeably changed. Her lips spread into a benevolent smile, which seemed especially creepy compared to her previous expression, and her eyes gleamed with greed. She instantly changed her demeanour, her anger replaced by coquetry, and even her voice changed as she asked, "So, do you know the number?" "What?" The man was indignant, involuntarily making a repulsive gesture. "No, of course not. Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. I have no right, and besides—" Suddenly, the notary, with whom Richard had always worked, appeared in the spacious office. "Mrs. Mulroney, please come to my office." Heather, becoming more and more irritated, shrugged her shoulders. "Fine," she replied and walked forward. When the office door closed, she decided not to beat around the bush. "What is this number?" she asked menacingly. "Can anyone explain it clearly to me? I've been unable to access my inheritance for a month now. I will sue your office. Mark my words." The notary smiled broadly, holding back a laugh. "Go ahead, Heather. But on what grounds are you going to sue us? Please tell me." "Because you are withholding my inheritance. That is a crime. Everyone knows that my husband was a wealthy man. Do you think I don't know how much money we're talking about? Of course, you've decided to keep my inheritance for yourselves. You're fraudsters." The notary shook his head. "I knew your husband well. He was not only rich, but also incredibly honourable. That's first. Secondly, the certificate of inheritance is issued after 6 months from the date of death. As much as I would like to, I have no right to grant you access to the inheritance, as you put it, until that period has passed. You have applied for the inheritance. Now, by law, we must wait for all other interested parties, if any, to do the same. And finally, who gave you reason to believe that your late husband's estate should go to you?" In a split second, the restless woman was next to the table and cracked her fist on it with a resounding thud. "But who the hell else is going to get it?" she shouted with all her might. "Who if not me, his lawful wife?" "Whoever gives me the secret number. It's in Richard's will," the notary calmly replied. "I've told you this so many times. Don't you remember? You, of course, are also due a marital share of the property acquired during the marriage and available at the time of the death of the testator. Here we'll pass the legal term. Then we'll see what and how to distribute." Heather seemed almost to explode in the literal sense of the word. "What kind of nonsense is this?" she questioned, looking upwards. "When did he ever have the time to make this strange will? He had a heart attack out of the blue. He couldn't have known he was going to die. How is that possible?" "Anything is possible," replied the notary firmly. "In fact, wills are mostly made in advance by prudent people, and your husband was undoubtedly such. But let us return to the subject of our little discussion. Did you find out the number?" "No, I haven't found out. But you said there was something else there." "That's right. In addition to the number, you must provide certain other proof." "What other proof? My God!" She rolled her eyes. "Remind me, please." "You must prove that you took care of the Brazilian." The notary smiled slyly. "That's all I have to say to a person claiming an inheritance. Only then will you have access to the safe deposit box that holds most of the deceased's assets. Until then, you may use what your late husband left to you personally, namely, the apartment he left you." "And the house?" Heather shrieked. "As a matter of fact, the house now does not belong to you either," replied the notary, "but as long as the other heirs have not claimed their rights, you can stay in it for a while." The woman laughed nervously. "Look, was he in his right mind when he made that damn will? I think he was out of his mind then. Putting his dogs to bed with him, giving them funerals. That's how he spent the last years of his life." She glittered with angry eyes, turning to leave. "Have a nice stay." The notary, after waiting until the lady was in the doorway, quietly said to himself, "I have a feeling that Richard's death has something to do with you. I don't know how, but I'll try to find out." Gasping, Diana was running after her four-legged friend. "Rio, stop!" The handsome young dog turned at his mistress's call, but the natural call was much stronger. After standing still for a few seconds, Rio decided that a passing bird was more important than Diana's call. Throwing a guilty look at his mistress, he started running. "Stop! Stop!" Diana continued to shout. She was visibly tired and unable to run any longer, stopped on the spot. "What kind of dog are you?" she exclaimed in frustration. As Rio grew older, he became harder to handle. At home, he was calmer than when he was a puppy, but whenever he saw a big bird outside, he became uncontrollable. Rio was so fast that it was impossible to catch up with him. However, Diana learned that his behaviour was just a peculiarity of Rio's breed when she asked the veterinarian at the clinic where she worked about him. "David, I wanted to ask you something. You see, Liam and I recently got a dog, and I had some questions." "I'm listening," the vet replied. "Congratulations, by the way. A new member of the family is great. What breed is it, may I ask?" "If I knew, I'd love to tell you." She smiled guiltily. "We found him on the road. Can you imagine? Someone had left the little pet all alone, right on the highway. He was so small. I don't even know what breed he is. But Rio has grown from a tiny pet into a big dog," she said proudly. "He's a good dog, but he's naughty. I'll show you a picture of him." She searched through the photos on the phone and then proudly turned the screen to the doctor. David looked at the photo and asked with surprise in his voice, "Diana, are you sure this dog was abandoned?" The woman smiled sadly. "Well, of course. At least it looked that way. Why?" "It's an Irish setter." The doctor raised his eyebrows. "A hunting breed. If he's got a pedigree, which he must have judging by the branding, he's an expensive dog." "Expensive?" She frowned. "But who would leave an expensive puppy on the highway? Better to sell it in that case. And why did they buy it in the first place? It's ridiculous." "I don't know what kind of idiots they are, but apparently there are some." The doctor shrugged. "Irish setters are very intelligent and very active in nature. It's a breed that needs to be exercised, ideally to go hunting. But you're hardly a hunter, are you?" "Oh, of course not," laughed Diana. "I don't know anything about that at all." She hesitated for a moment. "An Irish setter. Well, I supposed he was a thoroughbred, but I couldn't imagine he was expensive." "It is," the doctor nodded confidently. "You know, if you could show me his branding, we could find that kennel, and then we could find the owners. Maybe he wasn't dumped. Maybe he was just lost." "No," replied the owner firmly. "I love our Rio, and my Liam loves him so much. I won't give him back." "Suit yourself," David smiled. At this moment, a girl appeared in the doorway of the veterinary clinic, and the vet gestured towards his office. "Follow me, please." Diana smiled involuntarily. Seeing the doggy in the carrier, she suddenly remembered that her son was waiting for her at home, and a filthy big dog, after a long walk, which Liam would hardly be able to wash well on his own. Diana's thoughts continued to swirl about the information she had just received. She looked at the calendar. Spring was coming to the city. The snow was almost all melted, and the air smelled of fresh earth and the sense of waking life. Hunting dogs need more movement, she thought, and decided it was time to open the village season. Diana didn't have an apartment of her own, but she had an old shabby house outside the city. She bought it when Liam was still very young. The young mother decided that the child definitely needs fresh air, and she in turn needs her own real estate. Having taken a loan, which, by the way, she had still not fully paid off, she became a homeowner. In the winter, it was impossible to stay in this cottage. There was no heating, but in the summer it was so beautiful. And in the spring, of course, it was nice too. Having decided that it was time to start visiting their village house, Diana immediately informed Liam about the upcoming trip and, with joy in her heart, began to wait for the weekend. By Friday evening, the whole family, including the dog, arrived at the summer house. Diana got out of the car first, looking around, and took a deep breath of the fresh, already slightly warmed air. "Beautiful," Diana said aloud. Then she nodded her head to her son as a sign that they should get out of the car. "Just be careful with Rio," she warned. "Yep," the boy replied and opened the door wide. At that very second, as if at the speed of light, an overexcited dog jumped out of the car. He sniffed the area for a couple of minutes and then, contrary to his mistress's expectations, ran outside the yard. "Rio, stop!" Diana shouted. "Stop, I say, stop!" But the captivated dog did not even turn at his mistress's call. He manoeuvred with surprising grace among the bare bushes and melted piles of snow, deftly jumping over large puddles. Diana, tired of running, stopped and looked angrily at her pet. Rio, as if guided by an invisible thread, was definitely running towards his goal. But Diana couldn't figure out what that goal was. She caught her breath and chased after the tireless hunter again, for he had almost disappeared from her sight. Eventually, Rio's restlessness led Diana to a wide field. Despite falling into thawed snowdrifts, he jumped into the bushes with incredible speed and picked up a large flock of unknown birds. The birds flapped their wings and flew into the air, leaving Diana and Rio mesmerized. Diana herself was captivated by the beauty of the birds. "How beautiful!" she exclaimed. She turned her attention to Rio. "Rio, come here." The dog looked at his mistress with anticipation, tilting his head to the side. There was a hint of disappointment in his eyes, as if he was saying, "What do you want?" Diana took a step closer to the dog. "Rio, it's time to go home." In response, the dog let out a dissatisfied bark. Undeterred, Diana slowly approached and grabbed Rio by the collar, leading him back home. "Oh, come on. You were so eager to chase those birds, weren't you?" she teased. "Of course he was." A gruff male voice suddenly chimed in from behind. Startled, Diana turned around and saw a tall, broad-shouldered man approaching. He had a large gun slung over his shoulder and was dressed in a camouflage suit and high boots. The stranger approached with a broad smile. "You don't have an ordinary dog. You have a real hunter," he remarked, getting closer to Diana. "You can't just feed a dog like that. You have to let him hunt. And from the looks of it, you have an excellent specimen. I even envy you." "I know," she responded, feeling a bit embarrassed. "But I'm not a hunter at all," she added with a guilty smile. "So my little friend has to run home, not to hunt up birds. It's getting dark." "A dog like that should definitely be hunting," he exclaimed. "I'm telling you this as an experienced hunter. Why else did you choose this breed? You could have gotten a Chihuahua, for example." Sensing the irony, Diana rolled her eyes and replied, "I didn't specifically choose this breed. I didn't even know he was such a hunting dog when I found him as a little puppy." She looked at Rio affectionately and stroked his head. Meanwhile, Rio was sniffing the man's clothes with great interest, as if he had caught an intriguing scent. "Did you find him?" the man asked in surprise. "I can't believe. It's a red Irish setter. You don't come across dogs like that every day. They're not only expensive, they're also rare." "Nevertheless, my son and I found him on the road. Someone had abandoned him there as a tiny puppy. It wasn't too far from here, actually. We were on our way back from our house." "That's unbelievable," the man exclaimed indignantly. "What kind of owners would do that? You know, I actually know the owner of the kennel that breeds these beautiful dogs. He would never sell his puppies to just anyone. He carefully selects new owners, even conducting checks and tests. I'm truly shocked," he continued, expressing his disbelief. "Well, that's how it happened," Diana replied calmly. "I should be going now. It's getting dark." "Wait, please tell me your name." "Diana," she answered with a smile. "That's a lovely name," the man replied. "It's my favourite, as Diana is the goddess of the hunt." Diana warmly laughed in response. "And what's your name?" "Harry. You can just call me Harry," he said with a smile. "You mentioned having a house here? Maybe we could meet again. I could introduce you to the owner of the kennel I had mentioned. He would tell you much more about this breed than I could." Diana felt a bit embarrassed, but replied, "I guess we could meet. We live over there." She pointed in the direction of her house. "Come tomorrow evening, for example. I've taken a few days off work, and will be here for at least a week." "I can't come to you in the evening hunting," said Harry. "The best time for bird hunting is just about sunrise or sunset, like now, for instance. By the way, I was just on my way to the pond to look at the geese. Perhaps you could let your dog go with me. He'll get a good workout, and then I'll bring him back to you." Diana hesitated. Harry looked up at the dog, who was still actively sniffing his leg. "I think your dog is all for it. He doesn't need to be trained. I've seen him work with birds. What do you say?" Diana, of course, was about to refuse such an offer. However, the man's beautiful eyes made this answer very difficult. Of course she didn't know him at all, didn't know who he was, didn't know what to expect from him. What if he would steal Rio? "I'm sorry, but no," she said after all. Diana would have liked to agree. She wanted her dog to do what he was supposed to do, but fear for her pet overpowered her. "I don't know you at all." "Fair enough," Harry smiled broadly. "In that case, I hope you and I will still have time to get to know each other better." Diana turned red. "And I hope so." She spent a few more long seconds looking at the man across from her, confused. There was something about him that tugged at the thin strings of her soul. There was courage and bravery in him, undeniable strength, and even nobility. However, hunting always seemed somehow barbaric and outdated to her. It was one thing to buy meat to cook dinner for your family, and quite another to kill for fun. But nevertheless, Harry seemed like a good-natured, interesting and intelligent man. "Mum! Mum!" shouted Liam. "Where have you disappeared to?" He ran out of the house, seeing her through the window. "I thought something had happened to Rio." "Oh, Liam, I'm sorry," Diana answered. "I didn't think you'd be so worried, and I didn't have a chance to come back sooner." "Of course I was worried. What happened? Where did he run off to?" The boy was immediately by Rio's side, examining him from different angles. "Rio, are you okay?" he asked, resting his head against his favourite dog's forehead. "He's fine, don't worry." The mother calmed her son, came up to Liam and kissed him on the top of his head. "Rio chased the birds in the field. Remember we used to walk there in the summer, and we met someone." "Who?" Liam asked in surprise. "A real hunter." Telling about Harry, Diana was instantly embarrassed. "He said that our Rio was a born hunter. He even offered to take him hunting, but I refused. I don't know him well yet." "Hunting?" The boy's eyes widened with excitement. "Mum, why'd you say no? Rio would have been a really tough dog and caught us a bear." Diana laughed. "Well, not a bear, but a duck, maybe." "And I actually like duck. By the way, you haven't cooked duck in a long time." Liam hugged the dog once more and then stood up and with a dreaming look said, "Maybe I could go hunting too," he said suddenly. "Ask that man. Maybe he'll take me too, eh?" The astonished mother spluttered. "Honey, I've told you, I don't know him at all. How can I give him Rio and you? Maybe, but later." "Mummy, please," resented the boy, and calling the dog with him, walked deeper into the yard. A few hours after the unexpected acquaintance, Diana and her family were already strolling slowly along the almost deserted village, looking carefully around. She had already had time to unpack all the things they had brought with them, to clean the house after the long winter. The dog carefully was sniffing around, seemingly hearing something that only he could detect. Occasionally he would pause with his floppy ears perked up, and sometimes he would stand up as if preparing to jump. Liam and his mum were about to head towards the house. Rio suddenly froze in place and then took off with such force that Diana couldn't hold on to the leash. "Rio, what are you doing?" she shouted, chasing after the dog. "Mummy, stop!" Liam suddenly shouted. "I'll catch up with him myself." With these words, the boy ran ahead. Diana abruptly stopped. How grown up he is, she thought, watching Liam. So independent. With that in mind, she headed in the same direction her son and the dog had gone. After a few turns, Diana noticed an unusual sight in the distance. Liam, gesturing vigorously with his hands, was speaking to a stranger. Her motherly heart skipped a beat. Who the hell is that? She had time to think. Concerned, Diana quickened her pace, trying to reach them as quickly as possible. As she got closer, she breathed a sigh of relief. Standing next to Liam was Harry. The sight made her heart race and her cheeks visibly blush. Her son looked at his companion with delight. The beloved dog circled nearby, occasionally jumping on Harry and dirtying his clothes with its paws. Diana put on her most welcoming smile, adjusted her hair and moved closer. "Harry, nice to meet you," she said, stepping forward. "Diana, good evening." The hunter smiled widely. "I've already had the pleasure of meeting your son. Why didn't you tell me he was so eager to go hunting? I'd love to take Liam with me." "Oh, well," Diana said, feeling embarrassed. "And how did you realise he was my son?" "Well, you two look like two drops of water. And I recognised your dog right away." He patted Rio on the head. "As a true hunter, he sensed the game immediately. Diana, please let him join me in the field. And Liam too. I could use some help. What do you say?" Diana offered a faint smile and then noticed a bag filled with game lying next to the man. "By the way, how about this? I'll take Rio and Liam hunting, and in return, I'll give you half of what we catch." Diana felt embarrassed, lowering her gaze once again. "I don't mind," she finally answered. "When is your next hunting trip?" "Tomorrow at dawn," he said. "Here's my suggestion. Tomorrow morning, Liam, Rio and I go hunting, and in the evening, I invite you to my place. We'll cook what we catch, and you take your share, of course." "I don't know," she pondered. "Already? Tomorrow? So soon?" "Mum, please," Liam pleaded pitifully. Supporting him, Harry chimed in. "Please, Mum," he smiled. And Rio sat down on the ground and tapped his mistress with his paw, demanding attention. "All right," Diana laughed and waved her hand. "You've got it." The next day, he went hunting with Liam and Rio. The boy was thrilled with this activity and spent the rest of the day talking about the birds he had caught, hunting in general, and Harry. In the evening, the family visited the hunter and enjoyed a delicious woodcock. Diana and her new acquaintance reached an agreement. She would let her son and Rio go out into the field with Harry, and he would treat them to fresh meat in return. Sometimes Diana thought to herself, "It feels like I owe him. Liam is so happy, and Rio is occupied with his favourite work." However, she didn't admit it to the man. She enjoyed spending time with the hunter, and their communication extended beyond their arrangement. They'd all often go for walks together. Liam and Rio ran ahead, and they followed, talking about everything in the world. Diana couldn't acknowledge to herself that she liked this man. Her past relationships had left deep scars in her soul, but going against her own feelings was difficult. It was evident that Harry liked Diana just as much, if not more. They could talk for hours and walk without feeling tired. Diana often noticed how Harry looked at her. These moments would turn her world upside down. She wanted to shout, "Just kiss me finally!" But she remained silent, and Harry, for his part, was very modest. Perhaps he was afraid of not receiving the same affection in return, or of rushing things too much and jeopardizing their relationship. Both of them knew what the other liked, but neither of them dared to take the next step. Towards the end of the week, when Diana and Liam's unplanned vacation was coming to an end, they decided to visit Harry's place to say goodbye. Upon learning that his new friends were leaving, Harry was very upset, although he himself was planning to return to the city in the next few days. After some thought, he suggested that they go out together to another place on the next weekend. "Fresh air, hunting, a cosy cabin in the middle of nowhere," he described. As it turned out, he knew a nice place he had been renting for the past year. Diana, though nervous, agreed nonetheless. Spending the night with a man in the same house was a mix of desire and fear for her. Meanwhile, in an entirely different location, a series of events were unfolding. Since the last time Heather had visited him, Mr. Connor had been deep in thought. He still couldn't understand what had led him to this idea, but it was clear as day to him that Heather was hiding something. He couldn't comprehend what it was, and there were no preconditions, except for Heather's own personality. She was an evil, vile, and obviously very deceitful woman. After long consideration of his next steps, Mr. Connor started to act covertly. He learned from the guard who worked in his friend's house that security cameras were installed around the perimeter of the property and inside the house, right after Heather had cheated on her husband. Mr. Connard already knew about this fact from Richard. The cameras turned out to be tiny and inconspicuous, and Heather was completely unaware of their presence. There was only one thing left to do: retrieve the recordings from the day of Richard's death and see if anything suspicious had occurred. For 2 hours, Mr. Connor and his assistant watched the video recordings from the cameras. They carefully examined every corner of the large property, but nothing suspicious happened. Then they started reviewing the footage from inside the house, and there was nothing of interest there either. When they had almost given up hope, having decided that they would never find anything, they noticed the strange behaviour of the couple in the living room. At the very moment Richard brought the dog into the house, the couple began to quarrel. The woman ran off to her bedroom, followed by her worried husband. "Oh my God, look!" the assistant shouted in shock. "This is the moment of death!" What they saw shocked him. Mr. Connor was right. It was she who was to blame for his friend's death. She hadn't called an ambulance for him on time. Mr. Connor stood up abruptly. "She'll pay for this," he said sternly. "Chief, then who gets the inheritance?" the assistant asked gently. "I don't care who gets it. The main thing is that I'll make sure that woman gets a fair punishment for the death of my friend." Diana, Harry, Liam and Rio drove out of the city. Harry had rented a beautiful, spacious hunting lodge deep in a centuries-old forest. He also bought necessary groceries and didn't forget to bring treats for Rio and additional equipment for Liam. This weekend, Harry, though he tried not to show it, wasn't hoping for flying prey. He was passionate about making Diana his true mate. Arriving at the designated place, Diana began to organise her things carefully, and Harry stood next to her, looking at her with loving eyes. "Maybe later?" he asked, smiling. "Let's go into the forest now, take a look around. Liam and I will go hunting very soon, and the stuff can wait. Liam, Rio, are you all in?" "Let's go!" The child and the dog jumped joyfully in place. They left the house and walked slowly and steadily. Harry stopped occasionally to look around, and Rio followed him, sniffing every bush. "And I would never have noticed it," said the woman, pointing her head at another trail. "And you're so attentive. You see everything. Whose trail is that, by the way?" "A boar's," answered Harry, and raised his eyebrows in surprise, seeing another man behind Diana. "It was a huge boar," joyfully repeated an elderly stranger. "Harry, glad to meet you. Have you escaped from the city too?" "Christopher." Harry took a confident step towards the stranger and shook his hand firmly. "That's what being a professional means. Not a single animal can hear you, because you move so imperceptibly." Christopher smiled. "It's all experience." He shifted his gaze to Diana. "Oh, how glad I am that you, Harry, have come to your senses. Your wife is such a beauty." Diana blushed momentarily, and Harry coughed awkwardly. "She isn't—" "I've come to you because I don't remember you being at my kennel," Christopher interrupted him. "But the dog seems to be mine. Where did you buy this beauty? Did you buy it at the market? What a dog! Oh, he's so handsome." Christopher patted the back of a very unresisting Rio. "Oh, I'm so glad we met you. I had forgotten what I promised." Harry turned to the woman. "Diana, I'd like you to meet Christopher, the owner of the best kennel of Irish red setters. Do you remember? I told you about him." "Hi, nice to meet you." The woman smiled and extended her hand. "I'm Diana, and this is my son, Liam. I didn't buy this dog, you see. I found him on the highway. Somebody threw him out when he was just a puppy." "What?" Christopher seemed to be furious. "What a nonsense! It can't be." Diana shrugged her shoulders. "But that's true. Liam and I found our Rio on the way back from the summer house. It was—" "Rio? Is that Rio de Janeiro?" The kennel owner interrupted her impolitely. He was bought from me by a good man, also a hunter. Unfortunately, he's dead. No, it can't be the same dog, because he still had a mistress." Then Christopher commanded it to lie down. His stern and confident voice convinced the dog to obey. Perhaps it was the result of years of experience with dogs, or maybe Rio understood something. When the breeder examined Rio's belly, he was surprised to find the branding of his kennel. "He's really from my kennel," he said. "Where and how did you say you found him?" Diana and Liam recounted their encounter with Rio. Christopher's stern expression intensified as he listened. "So, Heather got rid of the puppy after Richard's death," he said menacingly. "Heather has always been peculiar, but this is beyond belief. I've always been careful in choosing owners for my dogs, and now this." "We are good people too," little Liam interjected. The elderly man smiled affectionately at him. "Oh, I apologise. I'm glad that Rio has found a new family, and it's clear you're taking good care of him. But I need to go and see Heather and find out. I'll call you. Harry." With these words, the kennel owner quickly walked away. "Why is he going to Heather's house?" Diana asked anxiously. "What does he want? Does he want our dog back? I won't give him back. Rio is our dog." "Don't worry, Diana," the man assured her. "Yeah, Mummy, don't worry. Christopher seems cool. He wouldn't do that." "I hope," the woman said quietly. Night fell. They returned from the successful hunt. Liam had eaten a hearty dinner and gone to bed upstairs, while Rio snoozed quietly on a carpet near the fireplace. Diana was sitting on the sofa, unable to get her conversation with Christopher out of her mind. What will happen now? She wondered. What if Heather wants Rio back? She was snapped out of her sad thoughts by a gentle touch on her shoulder and Harry's soft voice. "You're worried, aren't you?" "Yes," she confirmed. "I know it's unlikely, but what if—" She raised her head abruptly and only then realised how close Harry was to her. She felt a little dizzy. She wanted to pull away, to create some distance. But Harry's beautiful eyes mesmerised her, leaving her unable to move. His scent was intoxicating, reminiscent of pine trees and the woody smell of the forest, mixed with a hint of gunpowder. She shifted her gaze from his eyes to his lips. "I have the feeling that something is about to change," she whispered. "I feel it too," Harry replied, unable to hold back any longer. He leaned in and gently kissed his chosen one. The kiss was tender, as if he were afraid of offending the woman of his dreams. From that night on, the couple became inseparable. One beautiful morning, after returning to the city, Harry, who had a flexible schedule, invited Diana to have breakfast together at a cafe. As they perused the menu, Harry's phone suddenly rang. "Sorry, honey," Harry said, pulling his smartphone out of his pocket. "It's Christopher is calling. If you like, I won't answer." "The kennel owner?" Diana leaned in with interest. "Answer it soon. Maybe he's already visited that woman." Harry shrugged and answered the call. His expression changed as the conversation progressed. After several minutes, he finally hung up the phone and looked at his beloved with a serious expression. "Well, what is it?" she asked impatiently. "Speak quickly or I shall go mad." "Diana, no one's taking your dog," said Harry. "This Heather, I think she's facing a term." "What? Why?" Diana immediately calmed down about Rio. "So, what happened?" "She seems to have made her own husband die," the man finally said. "I've known him, or rather, we crossed paths a couple of times on the hunt. Richard was a good man, a soulful man." "I'm so sorry." Diana took his hand. "But how did she do this?" "Technically, she didn't. He had a heart attack, and she didn't call an ambulance. She stood by and watched him die, waiting until he was beyond saving. This was recorded on camera. Shortly before his death, Richard bought Rio from Christopher. The same day he picked up Rio, he went to a notary and made a will. The deadly meanness of Richard's wife was discovered by his notary, who was a friend of his. Now she was taken into detention, and now she faces a real term. "What a horror," Diana quietly replied. "But how did Christopher know all this?" "From that very notary. By the way, he said that we should visit his office." Harry frowned, puzzled, but I didn't understand why at all. "Strange indeed." Diana confirmed his words. "But since it's my day off today, why don't we go right away? Do you know the address?" Half an hour away, they were already in the right place, and the notary met them in the lobby of the office. He looked satisfied and even happy. "Good afternoon," Mr. Connor greeted them. "I hope you had a good trip. How may I address you?" "Diana," replied the visitor, embarrassed. "And this is Harry, a friend of mine." "Pleased to meet you," Mr. Connor said. "Diana is the goddess of the hunt. You knew that, didn't you? My late client had a passion for hunting, like nothing else in the world. Tell me, did you know the late Richard?" "No," the woman replied. "Mr. Connor, don't take this the wrong way, but why did you invite us?" The notary smiled enigmatically. "Good question. Please, have a seat. The fact is that my late client and dear friend made a very unusual will. Since he had no children or other relatives, he decided that upon his death, his estate would go to someone who shared his life views and values. Of course, he was married, but you already know what his wife did, don't you?" The notary cast a bitter look around the audience and continued, seeing the sympathy on their faces. Many people thought Richard was strange and unsociable. This is partly true, but he was a kind man, very intelligent, and believed that dogs were much better than people. You're probably wondering why he didn't leave everything to his wife. Because he knew who she really was. Yet he didn't divorce her. He pitied her light-heartedly, but he knew she was only with him for the money. So, when he began to feel that his days were coming to an end, he decided to leave this unusual will. Before he died, he bought an expensive hunting dog. But since he assumed that he might soon give his soul to God, he decided to take care of his new friend. And who would shelter him in case of his master's death? He knew that his spouse wouldn't take care of the puppy. Unfortunately, he had no idea how vile she would act. "So," the notary continued, "I now intend to read out his will to you. It reads as follows. All my property, wherever it may be and whatever it may consist of, which will belong to me at the time of my death, including my house, bank deposits, and the like, shall go to the person who produces proof that my Brazilian is in good health. Also, this person should name a 6-digit code." Here Mr. Connor looked attentively at his interlocutors. "So tell me if you know someone who could claim this inheritance." "A Brazilian," quietly pronounced Diana. "Isn't that our Rio? Our dog, Rio the Irish setter. After all, his full name is Rio de Janeiro, isn't it?" Mr. Connor smiled contentedly. "That's right. We are talking about a dog, a red Irish setter. True, we will have to establish that the dog is precisely the right one. As you probably know, it must have a chip with a unique number. As for the numerical code, I think that should also be known." "I think I know," Diana said thoughtfully. Just the very next day, Diana and Rio were on their way to the examination to present the evidence to the notary. A committee of reputable veterinarians, smiling, determined that this dog was indeed very well looked after. A little while later, Diana went through her jewellery box and took out the piece of paper with strange numbers. Thus, Diana received an incredible inheritance, a huge house and a large sum of money. And the small apartment that had been given to Heather, she, unfortunately or fortunately, did not need. She had already been using another dwelling for several weeks, somewhere in one of the prisons. Diana and Harry married a few months later. At first, Harry did not want to move into Richard's house. He was uncomfortable with the fact that his bride turned out to be so wealthy. But what won't you do for the sake of your beloved? Some of the money Diana invested in the organisation of shelters for homeless pets, and the rest was put aside for education and the future of their children. Why children? Because she already had a little new heart beating under her heart. Soon, Liam had a baby sister, and then another. Rio wasn't without gifts either. One early fall morning, he was delighted to find a little red-haired puppy in the yard. She was very shy and trembling, hiding her thin tail between her hind legs. From then on, every hunting season, Diana, wrapped in a warm blanket, usually stood on the veranda for a long time, holding a hot cup of steaming coffee and seeing off her nearest and dearest in this life, her husband, her son, and two cheerful, vivacious Irish setters, as bright as the sun rising over the forest.